We've been considering, as you know, the human condition from the perspective of Parker Palmer's The Tragic Gap. Probably the best Jewish example of the tragic gap, at least as it applies to us and ourselves, right? The gap between who we are and who we want to be, is the story of the patriarch Jacob, Yaakov, and in particular, his dream of the ladder. We meet him as a young man having just left home on a journey. Why did he leave home? He left home because he deceived his father at his mother's urging, dressing as his brother Esau in order to pretend to be Esau to get the blessing that Isaac, the father, wants to give to the twin brother Esau. So he pretends to be Esau, goes to his father, and his father says, "Who are you?" And he's like, "You know, is this Esau? Yeah, I am," right? And he gets the blessing. Needless to say, good for him. There's a Yaakov, right? So, needless to say, Esau is not so pleased and threatens to kill him. And so his mother says, "You have to get out of here, right? You have to flee." That's where we meet him. And so the sun sets, he's on this journey alone, he's walking, the sun goes down, he stops, he puts a stone under his head, and he falls asleep. And the text says, he dreamed. Behold, a ladder was set on the ground, and its top reached to the heavens. And behold, angels, messengers of God, were going up and down on it. So the ladder itself is a very evocative image of the tragic gap between aspiration and what is, stationed on earth with its top in the heavens. Note that as an image, the ladder evokes not just a gap, but a connection, right? It suggests that the aspirational self and the self that is aren't totally separate and disconnected. It's more of a continuum. And we move step by step. And by the way, we've been looking at the Kotzker's famous teaching about the nothing being as whole as a broken heart. We looked last night at the last line. The middle line, it's a 3-line teaching, is En yashar kesulam ikum. Nothing is as straight as a crooked ladder. Right? I want to suggest that this is precisely the ladder he's talking about. This is the sulam, Jacob's ladder, connecting who we could be and who we actually are. And it is so nice to imagine that this is like a straightforward staircase, as though aspirational living is a unidirectional ascent. But life is not thus. Standing in the tragic gap and aspiring is anything but static. Like the angels, we too are constantly going up and down the ladder. We make progress, we regress, we move forward again. In this way, the only straight ladder is a crooked one, right? Winding. But the image, the story gets even better. So there's an early rabbinic midrash in the name of Rabbi Yanai who says the angels weren't going up and down the ladder. They were ascending and descending regarding him. The Hebrew allows either reading, right? It could be the ladder, it could be Jacob himself. And here's what he says. They were exalting him and denigrating him, dancing and leaping before him and maligning him, ascending on high and seeing his likeness, and then descending below and finding him asleep. The likeness on high, seeing his likeness, draws on a rabbinic tradition that the image of Jacob, aka Israel, meaning each of us and all of us together, is engraved on the throne of glory on high. It's not self-aggrandizement, right? I'm destined for greatness, I'm going to save the world. It's aspirational and mission-based, a visual image of my share in upholding the kingdom of God, however large or small my role. The sleeping figure below is me as I am. And the angels are going back and forth comparing the two. Now, the dream is considered to be Jacob's first theophany. It's the first time that God appears to him. This Torah goes on to tell us that God spoke to him, etc. I suggest it's also Jacob's anxiety dream. And maybe, by the way, there's no difference. Sometimes God appears to us that way. A discomforting awareness of the collision between our self-image and the reality of who we are. Jacob here feels a poor mockery of his own self. The very angels are laughing at him. Now, on one level, this is about the challenge of being part of the throne of God, wanting to make a difference in the world, feeling the call and the urgency, and being mortal with all of my human bodily limits and needs, like sleep. Like the ease with which the angels go up and down the ladder, navigate the gap, that's hard for us, especially those of us with older needs. And I'm joking, but not entirely. Many of us aren't so gentle with our own physical needs and limits. The gap between all that we want to do in the world and what our bodies actually allow. And frankly, on this level, I'm really not a fan of the angels mocking Jacob's sleep, or the rabbinic interpretations which do the same, critique him for sleeping in such a portentous place and moment. We can't do big work in the world, or any meaningful work really, without taking care of ourselves. That's especially true in hard times like these. And some of our most important insights and integrations come when we pause and we rest. More generally, though, this is a dream comparing who Jacob is, how he has behaved, with his intuition of who he's meant to be and the work he's meant to do, and he knows he's fallen short. The dream, in a sense, reflects our yearning for self-assessment, self-measure, our own not only anxiety, but desire to expect more of ourselves than we have yet realized, to be held accountable and pushed. It's the yearning for today, the opportunity of Yom Kippur. And the sleep is metaphoric on yet another level. There's potential within me lying dormant, not yet awakened, activated. There are moments in my life I should have been sensitive to that I kind of slept through. How much of my life, how many opportunities and revelations have I missed by being on autopilot or busying myself with work and errands and all kinds of narishkeit, or being anxious about the future or living in the past and missing the present? What possibilities have I not noticed? What truths should I be aware of that I am asleep to, turning away, not wanting to see? We're sitting with these two big questions. How do we learn to stand in the tragic gap? How do we educate our hearts so that when they inevitably break, they're more likely to break open? Parker Palmer writes on this, and you have it as text number 2. Everyday life is a school of the spirit that offers us chance after chance to practice dealing with heartbreak. Those chances come when we aspire and fail, or hope and have our hopes dashed, or love and suffer love's loss. If we are able to enter into and consciously engage hard experiences of this sort, our hearts will get the kind of exercise that can make them supple. But if we try to shield ourselves against life's teachable moments, our hearts, like any unexercised muscle, become more vulnerable to stress. We'll never fully understand why people respond so differently to experiences of heartbreak. There's an eternal mystery about how the shattered soul becomes whole again. But people whose hearts break open, not apart, are usually those who have embraced life's little deaths over time. Those small losses, failures, and betrayals that can serve as practice runs for the larger deaths yet to come. Some people do this intentionally as a function of their spiritual practice, Yom Kippur, or reflective philosophy of life. Others do it because life takes them to places where it is either do or die. Jacob's dream is a pretty good model for us of a heart-breaking open curriculum, coming as it does at a moment of personal sin and failure, as well as loss, loneliness, vulnerability, one of those little deaths. It highlights the kinds of heartbreaking failures that, if we're paying attention and have the courage to own, interrogate, and integrate, can teach us resilience, compassion, love. Educate our hearts to break open. They're, of course, very often, the kinds of experiences and awarenesses we would rather avoid. Here are some that I pull out from this text. Moments when we have found ourselves shading the truth, or being manipulative, or outright lying. There are, of course, many pietistic readings which justify Jacob in the narrative, right? And a lot of them are right in a lot of ways. Jacob was really entitled to it. He was better suited for it. He'd make better use of it. Esau is not a good guy. He didn't really deserve it. Some of that may be true. I've taught from that perspective many, many times. Today, though, we're good at those rationalizations. We can be remarkably creative, often when we want something that isn't ours. Or we've convinced ourselves it's for a higher purpose. Here's Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, writing in the late 19th century in Germany. No nation, no community, no individual, however important their mission might be to God's work on earth, can imagine that they are indispensable for God's work on earth, and in that conceit, give themselves over to sin. The ends do not justify the means. A second experience, we find ourselves so hungry for blessing or recognition or love, and we end up treating someone close to us badly. Jacob is a wrongdoer, and he knows it. And to be fair, he is also wronged. He's the third generation of a family that seems to have only enough blessing for one child. And it's not him. What does it do to a person to know that in order to receive one's father's blessing, one has to pretend to be someone else? He has a father who doesn't seem to know his two sons well enough to tell them apart. We'll talk later, okay? So one of my all-time favorite comments on the Torah is again Rav Hirsch, who says the problem with Jacob's brother Esau, who the rabbinic tradition demonizes unfairly, is that the parents, Isaac and Rebekah, tried to raise these two very different children the same. When we don't see people as individuals, when we don't value difference and diversity, everyone suffers and everyone loses. Most of us carry a few holes in our hearts and souls, places of woundedness, traces of loss, when we didn't get the affirmation or acceptance or dignity or love that every human being deserves, when at critical moments we weren't seen. Those can become the buttons that get pushed and that may cause us to act in hurtful ways. The third example from this text, we find ourselves going along with something we know is wrong. Jacob did what he did at his mother's urging, but he was a grown-up. He raised practical concerns. What if Dad finds out? But never a moral challenge. I imagine Jacob, after the fact, embarrassed, ashamed. My brother Esau had the courage to challenge the whole system. Have you but one blessing, Father? Why didn't I? I think this is a big one for a lot of us to sit with this year. The things we excuse or look away from. In politics here, in Israel, how we deal with the environment in our own lives. And the last example I'll give is those moments when we realize we haven't been true to ourselves. Maybe not literally disguised as someone else like Jacob, but in all kinds of other ways. Pretending to be what we are not. Fulfilling others' expectations or values instead of our own. Or maybe we discover we actually don't even know ourselves. I'm guessing Jacob's dream reflects his realization that he acted without adequate self-knowledge, from unconscious motives and feelings. Jacob awoke from his sleep, the Torah reads, and he said, "Truly Adonai is in this place, and I didn't know." The Hebrew conveys an oddity that gets lost in the English. The Hebrew reads, "Vanochi lo yadati," and that word anochi, I, is superfluous. I didn't know would be v'lo yadati. That's enough. Vanochi lo yadati is really an I didn't know. And I didn't know. Which opens the reading, I didn't know myself. I allowed myself to be ignorant or in denial of who I really am, even in the presence of God. I can't do that anymore. This is just the beginning of the education of Jacob's heart. And I hope the beginning of our discussion, Jacob, because I want to hear what you have to say. He's got a long way to go and many other lessons to learn, as do we. Classrooms for the heart are everywhere in an infinite variety of forms. We lose someone or something we love. Life takes a shocking turn. We're pushed out of our comfort zone. Our desired path is blocked. It happened because of us. It had nothing to do with us. It just happened. or both. It was inevitable, it was avoidable, it was random, it doesn't matter. Whether it's an anxiety dream or what we call in Hebrew hirurim, intimations, little nudgings that something's not right, or a big disappointment or hard to bear consequences of our own actions or loss or aging or the world falling apart. No one moves through life without being wronged and being a wrongdoer, often at one and the same time, in ways that break our hearts a little or a lot. We don't have to say we'd choose those experiences. Often we wouldn't. And I would never say these things happen so that our hearts can learn. But when we have the courage to be fully present to them when they come, when we choose to enroll in the metaphoric sacred heart university, we can teach our hearts to break open instead of apart. And then we can become teaching assistants and even professors. We all know those people. The people whose hearts have been made more whole because they broke open beautifully. When we encounter them, they change our mood, our day, and sometimes our lives. They're the people who change the world, because nothing is as whole as a broken heart.